Okay, I think what we'll do is we'll start today's discussion with looking at the Shulchan Aruch itself, so that we have an idea of what the Shulchan Aruch says, and then we'll go to the Rav Shulchan Aruch, and then we'll do a little Imrei Yaakov as well. Now, what we're going to be discussing today is the financial aspect of Hashavas Aveda, as far as the time that I, in the course of doing a mitzvah, am taking away from my other responsibilities. Right? I find a dog, and I have to, in order to take care of this dog, I have to perhaps spend some money. But more than just buying some kibble for the dog, I also have to take several hours of perhaps attention away from my other work in order to be able to take care of the dog. And how do we account for that? Can a person ever justify withdrawing from the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda because he has duties and responsibilities that simply don't give him the time in order to do this mitzvah? Okay, so that's the balance that we have to try and find. So if we look just at there's a whole chapter on this in the Shulchan Aruch, but it's only got one seif, it's only got one halacha, and it's in Siman Reish Samech in the Shulchan Aruch. I think I have it up there in front of you. I hope everyone can see it. The Shulchan Aruch writes as follows. So first the Mechaber, Haroa Aveda Chayiv Lahachzir Bechinam Imhu Batel. So if you find a lost object, you have to return it for free. You're not allowed to take compensation for it if you're unemployed, if you're a person of leisure. Aval, im haya osek b'malacha ubato mimalachto sheshavet dinner. But let's say you are you're under someone's employ, or you have work to do, and the amount of money you're going to lose is, let's say, worth 1 dinar, which is a Babylonian denomination. Vehechzer aveda sheshava mea dinar. And during that time where you're going to be losing a dinar's worth of work, you're going to be returning a lost object that's worth 100 dinar. So lo yomar lo, tain li dinar shehifsadati. You do not say to the owner of the object, give me 1 dinar, which is what I lost during this time. Ela nosein lo secharo kepoel batel, sheyibatel me'osa malacha shahaya osek ba. But rather he's entitled only to less than 1 dinar. And how much is that amount? So the amount is called kepoel batel, which is how much would a person be willing to pay in order to not have to work. Or, in other words, well, if we take a look at the formal definition, it's basically how much, not how much would a person be willing to pay, but how much would a person be willing to take in lieu of working. In other words, I am a certain kind of laborer who works at a factory, and in the course of the day, I have to be on my feet all day, and I get $20 an hour for my labor. But someone tells me that instead of making $20 an hour, we'll give you $12 an hour for you to stay home. Right? So at what point would a person take a certain amount of money in order to not have to work? So it's usually around half of the normal amount that he would take, maybe a little bit over a half. And that's what I have to pay the guy if he retrieves my object. Because at the end of the day, by having him return my lost object, I've also saved him the exertion and the effort that he has to do when he goes to work. So he's not entitled, the person who found the object is not entitled to compensation for doing a mitzvah, because you're not allowed to take money for doing a mitzvah. But what you can take money for is the time lost from being off of your job. It's not the full $20 an hour that you would have gotten on the factory line floor, but it is an amount that a person would be willing to take to not have to go to work. And that's the amount that you pay this person.
Rabbi, are we
Uh,
going to develop this concept more? Can I ask a question on this?
Please.
I'm just curious as to whether it depends on the individual and their circumstances. If someone is really tight and every dollar matters, even if they like to have that greater leisure at lower pay, they're not willing to because they need that income. So is it going to vary depending on who finds the object, what the rate you have to pay is?
Um, it might. Uh, I'm not sure whether you look at this particular person, or whether the Beis Din makes an assessment as to the average person.
I guess that's
That,
my question.
yeah, that's the only part that I don't know offhand. So if we take a look, let me just look at the SMA for just a second. Um, there seems to be a difference of opinion that the SMA, who's a commentary here, brings down. He says the Mechaber is the opinion of the Rambam. Um, However, he says, and it seems like Elakama Haya Rotze Poel Zeh Libatel Mimalachto. It seems like from the language that of the Rambam that it is person dependent, that it's dependent upon how much this person would be willing to take to not have to go to work. Aval Hatur v'hu hayesh omrim shehevi moram zal svirle kaven de mitzvos hashava ena mutelis apoel tzrichin l'shalim lo gam kein schar hashava. However, we're going to see another opinion that says that you have to pay him, in addition to the amount that he would take for not having to work at all. You have to also pay him the labor that for the labor that he exerted in returning the lost object. And why is that? Because, as we're going to see in a moment, a person who is a laborer might be able to make the argument that I'm not chayiv in the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda at all. A person can, we're going to see this in a moment, that a person might be able to exempt himself completely from the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda if he's already preoccupied with working. So, based on that, there are those who say that he's allowed to charge not only for the time off from work, what he would be willing to take for not having to go to work, but he's also
Bless you.
entitled to be compensated for not only for the time, but also for the labor that he exerts during for in doing the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. So let's say he's got to schlep the lost object, or he's got to schlep the animal. He's entitled to be paid for that schlepping effort. So first of all, so we see the opinion of the Mechaber. Now let's take a look at the opinion of the Rama. He says, V'yesh meforshim, some say, kepoel batel kefima sherotze li batel ulihit asek bahashavata. He says, and this is the opinion of the Rama, that he's allowed to take more than just how much he'd be willing to get paid for staying at home, but also how much he would be willing to not go to work, but instead do this work. Okay, Kagon, Shahaya Osek b'malacha shenotin oleha dalid dinrin. So let's say, for example, he has a job that pays 4 dinars an hour. V'im hayabata legamri notel dinar. And if he would agree to not go to work, he would agree to do so for 1 dinar, which is a quarter of what his normal wage would be. But ulehit asek bahashavata notel shnei dinarim. But if you would give him an option of either going to work on the factory line, or to be involved with bringing Fluffy back to its owner, he would say, I'd rather bring back Fluffy for 2 dinars than to work on the factory floor for 4 dinars. So to be absolutely doing nothing, he'd be willing to take 1 dinar. But here he's not doing absolutely nothing. He's engaging in bringing Fluffy back to its owner. So for that, he says, I'd be willing to take only 2 dinars. So tzarech litain beis dinarim. Afal pi shemagia lo dinar bischar hahashava. Even though it turns out that he's getting compensated for the work that he's doing for the Hashavas Aveda. Now, so the difference of opinion between these two is that, am I allowed to take compensation for Hashavas Aveda or not? So it turns out that according to the Rambam, you're never allowed to take compensation for Hashavas Aveda. But according to this second opinion, you are, because you're not obligated in the mitzvah if you can make the argument that you have to earn a wage instead of doing a mitzvah. Okay? V'im schar ha'hashava hu yoter mimalachto. And let's say you have a very low-paying job, and the amount of effort that you need to exert to return the lost object earns you more than what you would normally be earning if you were working on the factory line. So therefore, ein tzarech liten lo rak kedei schar malachto. In that situation, you never have to give a person more than what he would normally be earning during that hour that he's engaged in. V'ha demuter likach schar hashava, hainu she'ein ha'ba'olim sham v'asa me'atzmo v'heshiv. But that which we say that a person is allowed to be compensated for his efforts in Hashavas Aveda is only when the owner is not present when Fluffy runs away, and he volunteers on his own to retrieve Fluffy. Okay? Aval im sham ha'ba'olim v'lo hitna. But if the owner is present when Fluffy runs away, and I don't go over to the owner and say, would you like me to get Fluffy for you? Then ihu da'afsid anafshi ve'ein lo ela kepol batal legamre. Then the finder, the guy who exerts himself to run after Fluffy, is only really because the owner was there. And I could have asked him at that moment, will you pay me to retrieve Fluffy for you? And I didn't do that. The most I can ever ask a person for my services is what I would normally be willing to get paid to be stay at home and do nothing. I can't demand the exertion effort, the exertion compensation, because in a situation where the owner is present, I should have made a deal with him explicitly first, because the owner could always turn around after I spend an hour running through the forest to retrieve Fluffy. The owner could always come back to me and say, that was a really nice thing that you did, but Fluffy knows his way out of the forest. I take him here every day, and I let him run through the forest, and then he comes back when he's done. So you really should have consulted with me first. But because he went through this effort, then I have to at least pay him as what a person would be willing to get paid for taking a day off from work. But I don't have to pay him more than that. And I don't have to pay him for what he would have normally been get paid for the exertion of running after this dog and retrieving it. Now, the imhitna im haba'olim o bifnei beistin sheyitol ma sheyafsid. If, however, a deal is struck either between the owner of the lost object, or the owner is unavailable, and I go instead to Beis Din, and Beis Din gives me permission, and they say you can be compensated for what you would normally make during that time, harei zen notel, then you are allowed to take your full wage. So, for example, if I'm a physician, I'm a lawyer, I'm another kind of professional, and I normally get a significant amount of money per hour dealing with clients or patients, and I have to take off time from work, I'm not allowed to assume that a person will compensate me for my losses that I took over that hour for returning their lost object. But what I am allowed to do is I can contact the owner and I can tell them, look, I found your dog. If you want, I can take off time from work and bring the dog to you, but you have to pay me such and such amount that I'm going to be losing. If you're not prepared to pay me, then the dog will be at my house, and you can come to pick up the dog whenever you like, but I don't have time to schlep over to Sudbury, which I just learned is a place that's about 5 hours from here north. Um, I don't have time to
It'll
schlep up.
cost more than a nickel.
It'll cost more than a nickel to get up there, right? I don't have time to schlep up to Sudbury to bring your dog back to you. If you want to pay me, and this is my wage, then fine. If not, then you have to come back. You have to come and get the dog yourself.
Although, Rabbi, I presume there's periods of time where you don't know who the owner is while you're looking after it. So you're not able to contact them to say, what do you want me to do? Because you're still trying to identify the owner. So for
Right,
that space
exactly.
of time, I
So,
guess
so,
you would be.
so during that space of time, this is where we have a machlokes between the mechaber and the Rama. The mechaber says you're only allowed to take the wages of poel batel, which means what you would be willing to get paid to do nothing. Um, and the Rama says no, you're also entitled to get compensated for the efforts exerted in returning this lost object. So
Thank you.
if it would have if to hire someone to do that same kind of work, you'd have to pay the dog kennel X amount of dollars. That person is allowed to be compensated. It will be less than perhaps what he normally earns, but he is entitled to take that. Now, v'tzarich lahashiv me'achar sherotzen l'shalim demei hefseda. And in that scenario where the owner has told you specifically, explicitly, that he's willing to pay whatever you'd be losing during that hour, you're obligated to fulfill the mitzvah then. And the owner has to pay whatever they agree to. Even if the agreement was more than what he would normally be entitled to, but a deal is a deal. Okay? And then that's again added by the Rama. And then finally the Mechaber continues and he says, V'im ein sham ba'olim v'lo beis din, shelo kodem. And if the owner is not present, like you asked Paul, and I have to go to work, and I can't afford to take off time from work because I need the money, so then my needs of employment take priority over the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. And it sounds like, according to what we're reading in this last statement, that there are times when I'm allowed to just basically absolve myself from the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Now,
so we've discussed the part of the person who finds the object. What about the financial position of the person who lost the object and the value of the object?
okay, so we are going to get that. There are going to be times when you're allowed to absolve yourself from Hashavas Aveda where the cost of returning the object exceeds the value of the object. Okay, we will get to that point, but that's not today's halacha. That's a good question, Izzy. All right, so now let's go to the Imrei Yaakov, and let's see what he says. Okay, so Lamed Gimel reads as follows: Haroa Mayim Ba'im Lishtov Stei Chavero. A person sees that water is about to flood his friend's field. Now, this is not the classic Hashavas Aveda, but when you think about it, it's the same kind of Hashavas Aveda. I see that my friend's basement is about to get flooded because I hear the water seeping into his basement, or whatever. In other words, I realize that my friend is on vacation in Florida, and I see the water seeping into his basement, and I have an opportunity to save him thousands of dollars of damage. Okay? So, lahashchit binyano, or you see water coming to destroy his building or his house. So, chayav ligdor bifnehem lemon'am. So I have an obligation to create some kind of sandbag barrier or to hire someone to stop the water from flooding in, okay, in order to prevent the damage. Shenemar, as the Torah says, l'chol avedat achicha, that this is l'chol, the word all, is the word that modifies your friend's lost object, which means that the Torah is adding additional things that your friend loses, and this is l'rabos avedas karka. This is coming to include even if your friend is about to lose real estate. So a person's house, which is going to be damaged significantly if there's a flood, or if there's, or let's say there's some, I don't know, what are some other examples where I see that my friend who's on vacation, his house is going to get damaged. It could be also if I see people coming into, breaking into his house, I'm obligated to call the police because of the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. V'chein kol kayotze bazeh, im efshelo lahatzil chaveru mehefsed, chayevu litroach b'chol kocho lahatzilo. Any other situation where I can save my friends from financial loss, I'm obligated to exert myself with whatever resources and faculties I have. Avol enu chayev lahotzi mammon al zeh, but I'm not obligated to spend money to save my friend's property. Okay, I have to physically exert myself, right, with whatever physical faculties I have, right? So if I have to fill sandbags and it's going to wear me out, I'm obligated to do that, but I'm not obligated to spend money to save my friend's assets. Ela imkain, unless yadua lo beberer shechavera yishalim lo me'atzma, unless I have every confidence that my friend will pay me back. Okay? But if I don't know that for a fact that he's going to pay me back, I can absolve myself by saying it's going to cost me X amount of dollars to hire someone to go down to the guy's basement and turn off the leak, etc., etc., etc. So if it's going to cost me that, and I don't have any guarantee that he's going to pay me for that effort, so then I can absolve myself technically from the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Lefichach, and for that reason, ein chiyuv Hashavas Aveda chal al mishahu ba'al esak bein bebalacha bein bechanut o b'sha'ar masa umatan. Therefore, any person who's a businessman or is involved in a certain kind of regular labor, whether it's a certain kind of professional or blue collar work, whether it's because I have a store and I have to be in the store during that time, or whether it's any other kind of business endeavor that I'm currently involved in that doesn't allow me just freely to sacrifice my efforts for the sake of this mitzvah. Be'inyan shal yedei tircho b'hashavas aveda yagia lo eze hefsid, that if by getting engaged in this mitzvah, I'm going to incur a financial loss, miniyas harevach, that I'm not going to be able to profit in the way that I normally would if I kept the store open or if I did this work. B'shema lo yachzirenu lo bal haveda, and perhaps the owner of the lost object will not compensate me. He may say, "Gee, that was really nice of you, but you want me to pay you for having been a good Samaritan? Why should I pay you?" And I tell him, well, I had to close up my bakery for that hour that it took me to retrieve your object and return it to you. And he can say, well, that was really nice of you, but I'm not going to pay you for that hour that you had to close up shop or that you had to take off time from work. And he'll blow you off. So if you don't know that for a fact that he's going to pay you, so then you can absolve yourself completely from the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. I mean, this halacha is really a game changer, you would say, right? There would be many instances when I'm involved in my regular daily routine, how many of you have office hours, or how many of you have to be at work at a certain time? And then all of a sudden you're leaving Minyan, and you see Fluffy running across the parking lot at the Bayit, and you say to yourself, "Gee, this dog looks lost," there could be any number of circumstances where you could say to yourself, "I can either get to work on time and see my patients or take care of my clients or open up my store, or I can open up an hour late and keep my patients waiting or cancel the appointments or whatever it is, and take care of this mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda." So you're not obligated to do that unless you have an absolute certainty that the person is going to compensate you for your loss. And sometimes you'd have to be able to make that estimation based on the value of the object, and so forth. So if we look at Imrei Yaakov over here, he writes as follows. So first of all, when we're dealing with an effort that does not involve loss of money to me or loss of wages, so I have to exert myself with all my physical abilities, right? Even if it means schlepping and filling sandbags the whole day. B'tzarech laso zos b'chinam, and you have to do this for free. Da'asr litol schar al kiyum ha-mitzvahs, because you're not allowed to take compensation for doing a mitzvah. Okay? Now, if I wasn't allowed to take compensation for doing a mitzvah, then I'm not allowed to earn a salary as a rabbi, right? So I'm getting a little nervous at this point because I may have to give up my entire salary for based on what we just read this line.
Don't we say, Rabbi, that if one could do something else, then the salary can be at least whatever else one could do? And I'm sure the rabbi is very capable of doing so many other things. So that salary would be that opportunity.
Paul, it's nice of you to say, but at this stage in my life, I got nothing. I'm not sure what else I could do. It's too late for me, I think, to go to medical school or law school. But you never know. Well,
for most of us who've been doing whatever we've been doing for such a long time, if we didn't do that, there's not much else we could do.
Yeah.
But that was my understanding of the concept.
Right. Yeah, and your understanding is correct. But we have to explain, if I'm not allowed to take compensation for doing a mitzvah, like teaching Torah or something else like that, so then what right does anyone who is involved in doing mitzvahs for their living, what right do they have to take for compensation? So he writes like this. He says, Ach ze amor dafka b'mitzvah shehi mutelas alav. It's only, I'm not allowed to take compensation for a mitzvah that I'm obligated to do, that is a personal obligation upon me. Kimo hashavas aveda shemechuyev kol echad miYisrael lahashav avedas achiv. So like when I spy a lost object, the Torah places a mitzvah personally on me as Daniel Karapkin, who has seen the object, to return the object. That's why I'm not allowed to take compensation. Avol b'mitzvah she'ena mechuyev ba, av she'im asa ki mitzvah b'zeh mutar lo lekabel al zeh schar. But if there's a mitzvah that's not personally attached to me, so for example, I volunteer to be a Torah teacher. God didn't designate me to be the teacher of Torah. And I decide to do that mitzvah to help other people, there I am allowed to take compensation for that. And the example that he brings in the Shar HaTzion, he says, Uchagon shochet la'acherin. Let's say a guy is a professional shochet. Okay, he works at the chicken facility down by Niagara, and he shechts chickens all day. So is shchita a mitzvah? Sure, the Torah says, you shall kill the animal as I have commanded you. So that's a mitzvah. Aflaman domer shemakayim mitzvah b'shchita. So every time you shech the chicken, you're doing a mitzvah. But mikol makom rashai lekabel al zeh schar. But you're still allowed to take compensation for that, because the Torah didn't label you as personally the one obligated to shech chickens, right? You decided to put yourself in that position voluntarily, and therefore you're allowed to take compensation because the mitzvah was not designated for you specifically. So that's the distinction that is made in halacha, which is why a rabbi or a shoichet or a moyel or anyone else is allowed to take compensation for the mitzvah that they do. Okay,
Rabbi,
yeah.
is there any, like, so that obviously would cover most people who are in education, rabbis, shochtim, exact, those types of people. Are there any things that you're aware of where people are charging where it's inappropriate
Um,
or earning a salary for something that, just for our own information, I'm curious.
I can't, I mean, generally speaking, there are, anytime a person is taking a salary, it's because he's doing something that is to the public good, right? Can I think of a situation where people are exploiting that in the Jewish sphere? Sure. I mean, let's say a person sets up a charitable organization and he spends his day doing fundraising to fund his charitable organization. And as a result, 50% of everything that he raises goes to him, and or 50% or less actually goes to the actual good that he's doing for the public, for the for the public good. So then I could imagine that that person has justified his taking money from other people in order to sustain himself and his family when he's really not doing, he's really not providing a significant service. You know what I'm saying? So I guess it all depends on the circumstances. What we always tell people, when you decide how to use your tzedakah money, right? You have to take into account not only the value of the tzedakah as far as what their advertising says, but you also have to take into account what percentage of your dollar is actually going towards the good that they profess to be doing. And every person who's a benefactor has a right to ask that question. And if a charity is not forthcoming with that, then you have to be very circumspect as far as whether you want to support that charity. I think that's an important issue. All right, more to discuss, but we're late. Okay, so we'll, Mirza Hashem,
Thank you,
continue.
Rabbi. Be well, everybody.